Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Looking Deeper with yours truly, Dana King Francisco, and the Reverend Sandra Herrick. Hey, Sand.
How you doing over there, Dana?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm okay, and happy spring.
Happy spring. We had a little bit more snow today, but I'm hoping that was it for a bit.
Yeah, it's slushy. We've been getting it off and on and drizzle, and it's spring. We get a lot. What I can say is the grass is starting to turn green.
Yay!
So we'll probably get another snow. We're like you. We get that last minute surprise in March. But it is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Good to be back with you. I'm ready to go. Our topic is amazing. Hello, Todd. I know you're in the network there somewhere.
Hey, Dave.
Welcome, everybody. There you are.
There he is.
Oh, I'm going to get out there and see you two again before I get really old.
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
This has been going on too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So
Let's do something. What do you want to talk about? You've got a program going here tonight.
Hey, Carla Jo. Yeah, I mean, you and I started last month with toxic spirituality and what happens when the lie is revealed. And we thought maybe tonight, we talked a lot about what gets revealed that perhaps has been a lie. And we thought we would roll that into death, dying, sin, and goodness. Juicy stuff.
What a light and breezy conversation.
Exactly. Hey, Jessica.
Hey, ladies.
Okay, so Sandy, toxic spirituality. We know a lot about that. I mean, we've experienced it. We've lived through it. And you and I are both mediums, which means that we deal with death and dying. And we're both Scorpios, which means that we deal with death and dying. And we were both raised Catholic, very Catholic, which means that there was a lot of death and dying and levels of death and dying and afterlife and sins and goodness and what qualified all of those things.
Right. And, it's interesting that, we combined the toxic spirituality because it takes time to kind of feel that stuff. And yet, as children, I really believe we sense things that we don't necessarily understand, and we're gaslit by religions or relatives or people with a sense of authority. There's something that counters our innocence or even our karmic knowing that we come in with that slowly gets worn away or told not to have exist. And so for me, when I hear toxic, it's when we're told we don't belong to heaven anymore, or we can't get back to heaven, or heaven doesn't exist, or we're not good. And I mean that from that place of whether you believe in heaven or not, that something wants to threaten you from being included to the beauty of spirit your whole life. That to me is where the toxicity, I have to take these phrases out, the toxicity comes in and threatens our right to exist in our faith or our sense of goodness to belong. What are your thoughts?
Well, I remember the very first time I even thought about death and dying and where I was going to go once I died. I was 8 years old.
Lord, that's young.
That was young, and we were living on the island of Oahu. My father was stationed at Schofield Barracks, and so we would vacation down at Waianae, and we had a cabin or a cottage that we would go to there on the ocean. And I remember one night at the ripe old age of 8, lying in my bunk bed, thinking all night long about what it was going to be like to die, what was going to be on the other side when I died, and when I did die, had I been a good enough person to to go through the pearly gates, or had I been mischievous enough or sinful enough arguing with my brother, that I would be, bound to the depths of hell and boiling bones and gnashing teeth.
Right.
And I remember being in a cold sweat about it.
What happened that day that made you think you were going to die, or brought the phenomena of the horror to you?
Well, there had been a young girl that was walking on the beach, and she stepped on a sea urchin. And one of the sea urchin spikes went through her foot.
Oh, wow.
And my dad, got her to the med station. He scooped her up and he ran her to the med station, and all was well. But when you're 8,
right,
that's a close call with death, right? Stepping on a sea urchin. And
right.
That's really what started it. And I remembered at the end of the night, just me, myself, and I on the lower bunk, a peace and a calm came over me that told me I didn't need to worry about it, in the sense of neither good nor bad, but there was a place afterward that would be meant for me.
How did you experience that, Dana? Because that's a lot of information for an 8-year-old.
It was a lot of information for an 8-year-old, right there at first communion time.
Right.
Which is, where the sin and all that comes up. But for me, I remembered, I can still tell you the way my stomach felt. It was in a knot. And then this sense of relief, and those words not coming to me in a voice, but coming to me in a knowing. And then I remember the knot in my stomach leaving.
Yeah.
And a sense of calm. And then I could hear the ocean again.
Oh, wow.
All of that fear and all of that unknown blocked the sound of the ocean, which is one of my favorite sounds in the universe. It blocked the sound of it. But the moment that knowing came over my 8-year-old self, everything loosened up and I could hear the ocean again.
Well, in just the beginning, when I said that we come with our karmic innocence or knowing about something that's bigger than what we are told, that is the toxicity, I'm wondering, and I really wonder this in that place of, is it something that was new information, or do you feel you were allowed to remember again something that countered your natural knowing?
I felt as though it was something that I remembered that I knew.
There you go. That gives me my hair standing up. Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to be able to discuss how we ask to reclaim ourselves from the toxicity or the deceit and even the brutal lies that are given to us or laid upon our psyches to deny us the right to belong and feel loved. And what I feel so sad about is that there's a modality out there that does that to us. Mm-hmm. More so than not. That is it breaks my heart to know that there are all these plateaus of ideas and concepts of what is real or what has to be put in place to condemn us from our freedom and our natural knowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that gives me the shivers up and down our backs. Who even started that thinking? Why did that thinking even, have to be a insert to our psyches? That's a sadness I have carried. I think the spiritual toxicity, that's kind of the poison that I contemplated as to why would you tell me I can't be with God? Why would you even tell me I'm not good enough to be with God? Why is something, I can remember the sense of going, what? Questioning something that you hear and it doesn't make sense, or you don't even believe that it's really being said, but it's taking you out of a place and putting you in another place that is no longer your sanctuary, your comfort, your natural state.
Mm-hmm.
Have you felt displaced from that, Dana?
Well, I will tell you that in all of my years as a medium, which are now 60 years of it, I have experienced people from every walk of life, every religion, non-religion, experience of death, undone or unfinished business. One thing I learned early on is that there's no set number of people who are going to go to heaven, because that all those slots would have been filled eons ago.
Oh,
And
you mean the 144,000?
yeah, exactly. I see that many in my dreams every night, right?
Right,
So
right. And I want everybody to hear, we're not putting you down.
no.
It's just that we're the globe, you're absolutely right. The amount of time that the earth has existed, I can't imagine a God limiting that gate. I don't even know how to say it, because it's so, what? That there it is. What?
Well, you know, it reminds me of years ago, I was sitting on an airplane and I ended up next to, as a Coptic minister, I myself ended up next to a Baptist minister. And we got on the subject of reincarnation. And of course, I fully believe in reincarnation. And at the time, he thought that was lunacy. And I looked at him, and for me, being just practical and plain, which tends to be my style when we're talking about these things, keeping it practical, I looked at him and I said, but so minister, or so Reverend, are you telling me that when you return to your creator, if the creator says to you, you know, Reverend, you've done such a whiz-bang smash-up job on the earth plane, I need you to go back and do it again because you made a difference. So what you're saying to me is that you would say to your creator, nope, sorry, my minister told me and my college told me I only get one turn. So no, I'm sorry. So if you believe in an omnipotent, all-powerful, can do whatever this being wants to do with all of us as its creation, you don't think that it's possible that you might want to, or that being might want to, re-up your... He looked at me, Sandy, and he started to laugh. And he said to me in all sincerity, I have never in all my life thought of it that way. Right. And we chuckled, and he said, well, of course. And by the end of that airplane ride, I also had carte blanche to come visit he and his wife in Cleveland, Ohio, anytime I wanted. And he said, you put that so simply and with such humor, it makes it real for me.
Wow. In that beauty and in that simplicity, I think that's part of the eliminating the toxicity of things that we don't even know that are toxic.
Yes.
And that is such a beautiful story about, here you have somebody convinced, believing, dedicated to a way of believing and the total faith in it until it's reframed. And also there's that place of TikTok. We're on our way to dying every day.
From the moment we are born.
And there is that place when what makes us rethink our end or our demise or how we even feel about. I mean, for me, there's this place in knowing that as I get older, first and foremost, I want to live the best I can to the end. But I also know that there are days that it's like, well, my dance card has been really entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's done, but this is a good ride, and it's been a good ride. So if I'm taken out, what do I believe? How will I, and anybody that's ever heard me talk about the day I die, you all know there's a pause at the gate. I'm going to have my hand on the hip and turn around and ask, wait a minute, what the fuck was that?
Uh-huh. Right.
I want some explaining about a few things. And I'm not even exaggerating, because there's that pause of, I do experience the vastness, not just of a free will, but the willingness to be free.
Yes.
That's my core, the willingness to be free. It comes at a price. And I am willing to be free of this body, of this life, as equally as somewhere inside me, I was willing to be free of my cosmic life before I was conceived again. Before my mother received me in my conception. That the will I have, that there's a faith or there's a knowledge or there's a knowing, or even just the randomness of the pinball machine. It's like, you're up, you're going, whee!
Right.
You get knocked around a little bit. But the willingness to be a part of it.
Well, I think for me, one of the first times that I realized that something was wrong, as Hafiz says with this camel ride, was when somebody told me that unbaptized babies go straight to hell or limbo.
Right.
Well, even as a kid, that made no sense to me.
Right.
Because if God loves us, and we're all singing, Jesus loves me, this I know, so the Bible tells me so, it made no sense to me. And then as I got older and all of a sudden the Catholic canon or the rules of the country club began to change and there was no more limbo and there was no more purgatory, I think that was right around the year 2003.
Yeah.
When all of these things started to change, I thought to myself, so really the toxicity is in the dogma and the rules of, I call them country clubs. I call religions country clubs. So whatever the rules are, they can be changed. But what about all of the people who went to their death or who mourned a child that they thought was lost in limbo? Or, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Because for me, it was a bit earlier when it was, you're going to go to purgatory or limbo when you eat meat on Friday.
Right.
And as children, we didn't have the control of our meals. And if my mother was exhausted and just happened not to make fish sticks that Friday, and we ate meat, it was like, oh my God, whose sin was that? Ours, hers, and you go to confession. I ate meat, eat on Friday, and it's that place of when they eliminated that as a sin. I had the same ridiculous response to what the hell about all those people that are in hell or purgatory that did it. What, do they get released? Do
Right.
they get to have an opinion or talk to somebody after the fact?
Did they get a celestial pardon?
Yeah. I mean, did they get to say, hey, what happened to me? There's something in it being ridiculous. I'm getting hyped up. I haven't had a drink. Unfortunately.
Right.
There's that place of who makes these rules.
And why?
Exactly.
And we're living in a time now. In fact, I was just teaching a class to an amazing group of people, or with an amazing group of people, and we were talking about the fact that Pluto is dancing around in Aquarius right now, and will be moving into Aquarius for the next 2.5 years, which means bye-bye to Pisces, hello Aquarius, which is wisdom, finally the Sophia, the divine wisdom, the shedding of the husk of toxicity of soul. I know that they're in toxic spirituality, I call them soul rapists, that have raped the joy out of people with these incredibly, well, at least for me anyway, noxious teachings. And people are waking up, the deconstruction movement, etc. People are starting to wake up and really take a look at a lot of stuff that's just plain ridiculous that we were taught, that we've experienced, that makes no sense whatsoever. And part of it has to do with...
Take a breath. You realize you're also speaking about current times, because everything's kind of being reissued.
Well, it is. So the kernels of truth are finally, popping out. People are going, I believe that bunch of hooey, whatever that was, from whoever. Maybe it was Aunt Martha that taught you that, if you don't wash your face on Friday night after eating your fish dinner, you don't know, right?
Right.
But we grow up because we have this idea of people in authority knowing more than we know in our soul. And I believe that people are waking up to the fact that their soul is pretty wise.
Right. And I think that I'm just going to rephrase exactly what you said, that people of authority have wisdom in their soul. They act like they do, but it doesn't really mean that they do, because they have authority.
Bingo.
And that's where we as individuals, children, young adults, teenagers, rebels, even followers, need to take the responsibility for following what it is we deem as the truth. And when it rubs us wrong, to be able to be fearless enough to say, this is not for me. There are so many people trying to break away from cults right now.
Yes.
Cults that have been, without mercy, stealing the identity of someone by saying, if I tell you you are not worth being with God, that's the rest of your life. And to know how deeply psychologically wounding this is, it steals people's minds. What you and I are talking about tonight is not just a matter of opinion. It's a matter of societal suicide, when people try to get away from these cults and they are in anguish about what really is true, because they haven't had the experience to identify their own experience without severe punishment or excommunication or being banished or being brutalized.
Exactly. And so, when I was thinking about our podcast tonight, and you just alluded to it, is that I think people now are starting to question maybe what they've been told and the things that have made them feel less than or sinful or etc. And because of the technological age that we live in, I believe that people are now questioning what they were told, with the caveat, because I told you so, because that's what the Reverend told you, that's what the priest told you, that's what the imam told you, therefore you believe it. People now are starting to question. And particularly, it's been my experience that people cling to their religion when they are told of a horrendous diagnosis when it comes to their health, and when people experience death.
Right.
And all of a sudden, myriad of man-made rules come up. I have had people come to me in my capacity as a minister and as a medium, and they have told me that it was explained to them that when you die, that is it. You become food for worms. and worms in and worms out. I've had people come to me to say, well, I was told that I had exactly 3 months and 3 days to connect with my loved one on the other side. And after that, they are gone to wherever they go. I have had people come to me and say that a visitation that they had, which was a lovely visitation from a loved one in a dream or an apparition, was the work of a demon.
Jesus.
And part of the toxicity of death is this idea that once you're dead, you're gone. And if you have a lovely encounter with the spirit of a beloved, that could only be the work of the devil, of the demonic. To which I say, why does goodness always have to be attached to? And again, if you believe that the creator of all things is this omnipotent, all-loving, all-father, all-mother, why would we not be allowed soul visitations?
You know, I'm stunned at how small the human brain really is in its capacity to think,
to discern,
spiritual or galactic, or, you know, that it's evil to think of numerology. It's evil to think of anything that has anything to do with spirituality, as in predictions or astronomy, not just astronomy, astrology, or, you know, there's something archaic.
Yes.
When a mind says, only believe God made you in his image. Well, if God made everybody in his image, you and I would both be men. So it's like, at what point do we hear what we're saying? That
yes.
can't happen in real life. God made me in his image. What, right there, it's like, what is the image of God?
Right.
Is it the idea of God? Is the holiness of God? Is it and how many versions of God are there? And let's face it, we're at war in America with God right now. If you haven't got the right God, you aren't American.
Right.
I mean, that blows my socks off. And to know we're back to that again?
Mm-hmm.
I thought everybody came over from Europe originally to get away from that persecution so they could, you know, now you're not American unless you are a bona fide Christian, according to a few people doing what?
Right. Discernment. Years ago, after I wrote my first book, I was sitting at the newspaper, and the editor had everybody in the newsroom on high alert because they had never gone out on a limb to write about something like the book that I published. And the editor of the newspaper, Mike Lloyd, said to me, I'm going to write my Sunday column, and I'm going to write it because I know you. And I know you're not a kook. I know you are who you say you are. But I want you to know I'm going to brace the newsroom for the reaction of people on Monday morning following my Sunday column. And the very first phone call on Monday morning came through our sports editor, Bob Becker. And he said, Dee, I've got a hot one for you coming in through Zeeland, right? So everybody in the newsroom knew that this was happening. And Zeeland, Michigan, at the time was extremely rigid and very fundamental, and maybe it still is. But there was a man on the phone, and he said to me, Denise, my name is John, and I have brain cancer. And on Saturday, I went to talk to my minister because my mother keeps visiting me, Denise, and she's been dead 30 years. But my mother comes and she sits with me and she says, John, when it's your turn, I will be here for you. And he said, I found so much comfort in that.
Right.
So I shared it with my minister, and the minister looked at me and said, John, I'm sorry, but you're delusional from the brain cancer.
Oh, good Lord.
Your mother's dead. And when you die, that's it.
Believing at that time?
Huh?
Did he say what his religion was at that time?
He was Christian Reformed. So Reformed Christian, Dutch. And American Dutch, not Netherlands Dutch. Which there's some, but anyway. So he said, I was planning to just take my own life yesterday morning. He said, but my habit has always been Sunday morning. I read the editorial page. I have a cup of coffee. And he said, I was going to do that as my last fun thing on earth because since it's just over with anyway, I might as well end it before this brain cancer gets too ugly. He said, but I opened up the editorial page and here Mike Lloyd is writing about you. And he started to weep and he said to me, Denise, I'm not crazy, am I? And I said, no, John, you're not crazy. The love of your mother extends well beyond a physical lifetime. Your souls are connected. And I just held the phone and he wept and told me about the visitations from his mother. And he said, you know, Denise, I'm never going back to that church again. He took away my hope and he took away the wisdom of my soul to know that what I knew was true.
Right. I think that's one of the things, point blank, that I know is true, that the gaslighting, the toxicity, the sense of a greater authority denies our natural knowing when we have it. And even when we're growing up and we have the natural knowing and share it with somebody who either doesn't believe it or is frightened by it or doesn't want us to believe it, will start to make us question ourselves. And that's where the rigor of staying in touch with yourself, knowing yourself, having to explore yourself, going outside yourself, being taken away from yourself, and to know that there is a self even to come back to.
Yes.
And I think for anybody and everybody that's out there listening to us, that is for me the most important, the most significant thing to say, that all these things that you and I are talking about are pollutants out there that we all experience, we all go through.
Yes.
And yet there is a real self inside each of us.
Yes.
That stays with us so that we can reaffirm it, we can reconnect to it, it can whisper to us that it's still there. Sometimes we have to go crazy for the whisper to be heard or available then to stop listening to what has driven us crazy and to know that there is that place inside us that is the absolute beauty of life. And I'm going to say that from that space of no matter who the God is or what the God is or the faith is.
Yes.
For anyone.
Yes. Well, when Elise was 8 years old and she was attending public school, so she was in second grade, I came home from work one day and she was sobbing. Her little 8-year-old self was sobbing in the living room and her eyes were red and swollen. And I asked her what was the matter and she said, I don't want to be Catholic anymore. And I said, well, honey, why don't you want to be Catholic anymore? And because she was getting ready for her first communion.
Oh, wow.
Right? Those are big doings. During her lunchtime at a public school, she was invited to a Baptist youth gathering next to the school, and she went because she didn't know. And when the mom who was running the lunchtime gathering asked her what her religion was, she said, oh, I'm Catholic. And that mother proceeded to tell my 8-year-old daughter that she was going to burn in hell with the rest of the Catholics. For an 8-year-old girl to hear that, who was so excited about her first communion, and to have her classmates look at her like, oh, Mrs. So-and-so says she's going to hell. I can't be her friend anymore.
Good Lord. You know, the Catholic Church kept very, how do I want to say it? It kept reinforcing that it was a sin to go to another church or another organization or another service, that you would commit a sin by exposing yourself to any other form of religion.
Right.
It was a wonderful way to control us from going and seeing if another religion made sense, or we didn't want to be with ours anymore. And I spent the night over my girlfriend's one Saturday night, and she went to church with her family, and Presbyterian or whatever. I mean, it was a beautiful New England church with white on white, and it had the balconies up on top where people over the 100 years would sing, and they had the little doors at the end of all the little places that you go in and sit. It was really very colonial, where the Catholic Church is gargantuous and marble and pillars and
candles and statues. And
and this thing was stark and no messing around.
Yeah.
And so I went, and it was given permission, my mother, to go. And now my girlfriend was a busy girl. She was having sex already. So we might have been about 15, 16 years old. She was already busy, and I wasn't. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. They passed the tray around with the little bitty, beautiful glass cups of wine and the little cubes of bread. And that was their communion, where they passed it. You took your drink of wine and you took your bread. And, in the Catholic Church, we weren't allowed to touch the host. You went, you opened up your mouth, you stuck out your tongue, and it was like you couldn't swallow it, you couldn't touch it, it was like it had to just fade into the light. So it was like...
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm sitting there, and I took it, and I took a swig and the whole thing. And then I looked at her, and I realized, I can't drink this because I didn't go to communion. And she said, "What's communion?" And I said, "Well, I didn't go confess my sins." And I knew she was sinning. And she goes, "What sins? What are you going to talk to?" That's when I realized, wait a second, I'm going to go to hell for having a fantasy. And she's got her ankles in the air, getting away with everything.
And going straight to heaven. Yeah.
But, I mean, they didn't even care. I mean, it was like, take a sip and have a bite and move on, girl.
Discernment.
And it was like, I had to starve in the morning. I wasn't allowed to eat.
Yeah.
I had to purge myself the day before and pray all night. And she was like, I thought she was doing a better job of being faithful than I was. Oh, God. That was the first time I really had the torque of, what?
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't so much about being Catholic because I loved the pomp and ceremony. I didn't like the shame and blame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Astounding how toxicity is all about shame and blame.
Always. Always.
And the fear of being shunned, the fear of being exposed.
Yes.
I mean, I know in my heart I've been stoned in past lives just for, several things everybody could imagine.
Right.
I was busy early on back then.
Well, I'll tell you that when Elise had that experience, and, well, thankfully, the principal of her school had worked with me at the newspaper when he was in college, so we knew each other really well. And I called him, and I explained to him what had happened. He was horrified. And he did not know that was going on during lunch hours. It was apparently an agreement between the teacher and the parent holding those meetings. But I will tell you that it took me a good long time. And, I called the priest and Sister Rosemary to let them know what Elise had experienced. so that they could talk to her about it. And I monitored her for the next quite a while to see how her friends from school were treating her. So that was very eye-opening for me, and not in good ways, the blending of public school with, all of that sort of a thing. But the audacity of an adult to tell my child that she was not worthy, not based on the beauty of her soul, but by whatever this woman had been taught about Catholicism.
Right. By some other religion.
By some other religion whose main focus, it's always about how many butts do you have in the pew, and ultimately how many coins will be in the collection plate. We all know that. We're getting to know that more. But the toxicity, whether we're talking about organized religion or the toxicity of spirituality and the New Age movement, about who's going to ascend to this dimension, who's not going to ascend to that dimension, all of that sort of a thing can damage a person's psyche, self-concept. It can change the trajectory of somebody's entire life.
I was speaking to my niece this afternoon, and she has been promoted to being the counselor, the psych counselor, literally for the school that she's working for. And she was talking to me today. Remember, Sandy, when you were young, you would think about running away, kids your age, or you ran away. And I said, well, I never really ran away, but your father ran away. I mean, but that's it. It's like our getaway card was, I'm going to run away. I'm going to escape. I'm going to, but that, she goes, today, they don't think that. There are two options. They think they're going to commit suicide or murder.
Wow.
That is the spectrum of today's children.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And she goes, 2 out of 3 girls think of suicide. I mean, when they sit down, and that it's like they don't have the grit to continue because their brain is already been mashed with you're not good enough. You don't fit in. You don't fit the picture. You don't belong to the club. God doesn't love you. Or, the last shooting was in a parochial school. Or, I'm staggered because when did killing be the right of God? For children to shoot children.
Right.
When does somebody's brain say, I'm channeling God and you need to die? I mean, I'm going to tweak this a little bit and say that's part of what's happening out there with people that are holding their guns and their religion and looking, you're a traitor if you don't believe in my religion and you don't belong to my rules.
Mm-hmm.
I have the right to kill you. How can we have the toxicity become the norm?
Right.
Again, that staggers me.
Mm-hmm.
And it does mean, please listen to what is real in your soul, not just what is fashionable or, I don't even know how to say it at this point, seductive.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so seductive. It's like becoming a popular way of thinking. And I'm wanting people that are starting to think about, wait a second, again, what? What does it mean to love? What does it mean to include? What does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be real? What does it mean to know yourself?
What does it
And
mean to be
enough strength
lovable?
to be yourself.
Yes, to be lovable. What does that mean? And I've heard, at least in my own practice with my clients, Denise, I used to believe in a God, but what kind of a God would allow? What kind of a God turns his back on one at the expense of others? You know what I'm saying? And where it used to be, well, you just have to have faith. No, people are now saying, wait a minute.
Right.
No, wait a minute. Because we're beginning to look at each other as fellow human beings and fellow human beings having this experience. Right. What makes this person expendable and this person not? And for some people, that's jumbling up their brain. And for others, it's having them ask a question. And for others, it's just too much.
Exactly. I can see 100 some odd years ago, we lived in clusters. We lived in small communities. You know, a township was a township. You had a couple of options for religion. You stayed within the cluster of your familiar. And it made for a safe life. It made for a comfortable life because you believed the same. You gathered in the familiar, and it was a small construct. We've gotten so big. We've gotten so inclusive. We've gotten so vast where what we see now in, you know, what we see getting on a highway and going from one town to another, people 150 years ago didn't see in a year.
If ever.
Really.
If ever.
And so I think it's fascinating, and I really do. I think it's really fascinating that God is or religion is such an important discussion. Faith is still such an important discussion, but not at the expense of killing and murdering, because that to me, it's something happened to the psyche of reality. Yes. What is real?
Yes. And whose version of real do I believe? Do I believe the version of real given to me by the cleric that sexually assaulted me, but they're the one wearing the collar? Or do I believe the version of real that I feel in my own heart and in my own soul? And am I willing to bet my eternal soul on what I feel is true versus what I'm being told is true, even though that person did bad things to me or to other people?
Isn't it rather shocking to find out finally how much sex, drugs, and rock and roll goes on with the holy?
And not just in the Catholic, church. No. Somebody said to me recently, within the last couple of weeks, Dana, I'm shocked. I thought it was just the Catholic priests that did these things. And I waited a moment because I thought, well, are they kidding me? Or now don't giggle because they may be serious. They were dead serious.
Dead serious.
I thought it was just Catholic priests. I didn't realize that it was members of the Southern Baptist Conference. I didn't realize that it was... And I just listened because they were having an epiphany moment.
Yeah. I mean, back in the 80s when televangelists were, making millions and millions of dollars, and everybody was having an affair. Was it Jim Jones? Not Jim Baker.
Jim
one
Baker.
Of the big ones.
Jim Baker.
Was up there. He was the Kool-Aid. But there was one up there that was like, the devil made me do it. The devil did. When he got caught hanging out with prostitutes, just weeping and holding the Bible. And I watched this idiot literally standing at the pulpit in the in the arena, because they had arenas as their organization,
Yeah.
weeping. And I thought, every man that just screwed around on his wife is sitting there saying, sing, Jim, sing whatever you preach. And because it was like it was getting them off the hook. Or every woman that ever had an affair. It was, the devil made me do it, I'm free and clear. And then a couple of months later, he got caught with another hooker. So, I mean, you know, it's sex with power goes hand in hand.
Yes, and it's not just relegated to
children.
Yeah, it's not just relegated to men. I mean, there are nuns,
Yes.
there are female ministers, that sort of a thing. And although you and I can be kind of glib about it and sit here and look and roll our eyeballs like, you know, the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people that are suffering because of the pages and pages of names of ministers from the Southern Baptist Conference, you know, who have been revealed as rapists or pedophiles or what have you. And they're suffering because they've put not only their weekly tithe, but their elbow grease and their faith and maybe their politics, their home life into that basket. And so when somebody comes to me and they've discovered the toxicity within their religion, or maybe they didn't go to a religion, but they were taught about Creator within their family, I always urge people to find a counselor, not another minister,
right,
but a counselor, or maybe you bring it up first to your doctor, somebody who can help with that, because it does cause psychological, emotional problems for some people. It can cause anger and rage, so many things, but there are people that can help process that.
And there are people that don't have to bring God into the vocabulary.
Yes.
Bless you or condemn you.
Right.
They bring logic, they bring in common sense, and they downplay the quote-unquote horror of there's only one way to believe, and that's the way that the people taught you. Otherwise, you're bad, you're evil, you're wrong. To desensitize, deprogram someone from toxic faith.
Yes.
Takes years.
Yes.
I want everybody to hear this. It takes years. I mean, as a Catholic, it took me years to feel brave enough to walk away from the way that I loved the Catholic Church and resented it all at the same time. To even be able to be a minister on my own, to know that, like, am I wrong because I'm not Christian? I'm not baptized according to the Southern version of Christianity. I angst over this. I wonder, what was I doing? What was my path? This is something that takes courage. It takes time, and it takes experience. And I mean experience by having the experience where you challenge what you've been told with a moment where spirit and you interact. And I know we questions like, did I make that up? Was that real? Am I crazy? I think it's so sad and cruel that when spirit really presents itself, we question our sanity.
Yes.
Rather than welcome the interaction.
Yes.
And yes, crazy people have crazy things, but we have been driven mad by being separated from the absolute simplicity that spirit and spirit and spirit are who we are. Spirit and nature is what we are. Nature and spirit and the universe is where we are, and it's all we really have.
Yes.
The rest is filler.
Yes. Yes.
Opinion, quite frankly.
Well, and you know, when it comes right down to it, you and I are both ordained ministers, and I've learned over these many, many, many years even in my own upbringing. I was blessed because I was brought up in a house, and the only teaching I ever received was that God loves everybody. That was it. Period. End of the story. The number of people that have come to me, older people, and maybe they are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, that have asked me in my capacity as an ordained minister, do I think that they have a chance of getting into heaven? Their child, another client will say to me, but my child took their own life. Surely they must be in hell. All of these sorts of things. One of the very first young people that I counseled who is transgender. And she was transiting from female to male. And his very first question to me in the presence of his mother was, will God still love me when I'm no longer a female? Will God still love me? Those are profound questions that have us question the preciousness of our soul. And I have always said, in fact, I just had this conversation with Easton.
Oh, God bless.
Yesterday on the way to school. No, one day on the way to school anyway. He loves that song from Wednesday. The Wednesday dance song. I mean, he has it memorized. Yeah, with your hands, that whole thing, right? He knows it. He loves it. He and Lily were dancing it and rocking it this past week together. But there's a line about what Jesus says. And I turned around. We were on the way to school. And I said, Easton, do you know what Jesus said? Do you know who Jesus is? No, Grandma, who's that? Well, he's 3, right? And I said, well, a pretty amazing teacher. Well, where does he live? I said, well, he used to live blah, blah. I said, but there's only one thing that you really need to ever know about what he taught. If anyone says to you, Easton, what did Jesus teach? Okay, Grandma, what did he teach? He taught us to love one another and be kind to every living thing. Easton looked at me. I looked at him in the rearview mirror and he said, that's nice. So I said to him, Easton, what did Jesus teach us? To love one another and be kind to every living thing, Grandma. I said, very good. God loves everyone, seen and unseen, grandson. Period. And God is female and male. I was teaching catechism to a 3-year-old on the way to school.
Wow.
Because in his soul, he knows that, and so I feel like I just needed to reaffirm it. But I am also very well aware that we are in a polarized time right now, that if he's singing that and somebody asks him what he knows about Jesus,
right,
that's all he needs to know.
Exactly. Because there's too many people that want to influence or steal the joy out of that right away.
Exactly.
And, you talk so much about the people in your practice. I want to say with the people in my practice, when they come to me and ask me about God, it's that place of what's in your heart first.
Yeah.
And what do you fear that God would do to you, or that you're not good enough to be with God? And it's amazing how to bring the love and the permission to exist back to someone is healing in ways that medicine doesn't, it's not about that medicine. It's about the medicine of, again, permission to know you're loved, permission to know you belong.
Exactly.
And it gives me the shivers on the shivers. It's when we feel we are not lovable and we can't belong. That's when people go off the deep end in so many ways.
Yes.
And belong to people that say, you belong over here, follow me. You belong over here, I'll tell you what to do. You belong over here.
Exactly.
We have to have the strength to identify and be allowed to identify who we are.
Well, I can say in my 60 years of seeing people who have crossed over, hearing them, being with them, call it what you will, no one has ever said to me, I didn't make it because I'm a member of the LGBTQIA.
Right.
I didn't make it because I'm Presbyterian. I didn't make it because I'm Hindu. You know what I'm saying? That has never happened. In all of my goings on with spirit as a seer, and never have I had anyone say to me, I didn't make it because. I've had people say, I'm still working on understanding why I did X, Y, or Z. But no one has ever said, I didn't make it. In fact, they'll say, I made it. And looking back, I wish I would have told people that I love them more.
Right.
I wish I would have not been so angry at the dog or at the neighbor.
Right.
I mean, have you ever had somebody, Sandy, say to you, sorry, I didn't make it because?
Interestingly enough, what I've had are people on occasion in suspended animation.
Well, I've had those.
Where they're like, where am I going?
Yes, that I have had.
What do I believe in to even go? And am I am I valued enough to go? When they're in that suspended animation is when we catch them and say, God loves you, you're in the light. And I don't want to be glib here. I don't have the thing I say, because what I say is channeled through me at the moment, in that moment, to them, for them, with them, which is the grace given to them to be graced their freedom.
Yes. I call them earthbound.
I don't have a page. I don't have a dialogue. I don't have a to go to. I have a be with.
Yes. You're inspired in the moment.
And that gives me the shivers right there to know that, because in that moment, I don't have that, well, what is their history and what do they believe? I just know their angst in that moment.
Yes.
Does someone find me, see where I am, where do I go, help?
Yes.
And we don't let them go until they feel loved.
And that's a whole other show and series of classes in itself, isn't it, Sand?
Looks like we can sign a few people up.
There you go. Well, with that, Sand, we're at the top of the hour. And, if for those that are listening, if you have questioned or you've begun the deconstruction process and you need to talk to somebody, there's no shame in finding a counselor or a therapist or somebody that you know has gone through that. Or if you're just questioning, you know what? It's okay to question.
It's always necessary to question.
Yes. Yes.
Keep your thoughts open and allow them to be known to yourself.
Yes. Yes. Exploration is a good thing.
Always.
Always.
Okay, my love, we're good.
We're good. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you to everyone who is out there listening, wherever you happen to be. And thank you, CJ and Jess, for being in the chat room. It was wonderful to have you with us. Good night, Sand.
Thanks, Todd, for being in the back there.
My pleasure.
Good night, everyone. Dream well.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
fascinating.